there's a sulfur butterfly treasure somewhere on this thing's mouth. Well, the patriarch of the Sparrow family was pretty adamant about taking possession of a specific piece of land somewhere out in the Double O. The current owners of that land may have a story to tell you about that. Danny Presley, Harnett County Historical Society. But I'm going to be a spirit of the West. I'm going to be a W.A. Goodman, Sheriff Goodman, shot in 1924 by Arch Cody. By the way, Arch Cody was hung in 25. But that's not what I'm going to hear for. I'm going to be talking about Jack Miller. He's a Texan that came here in 1883 and went to work for Divine and Todd Hunter. Worked for about a year, accumulated pretty good money, because he wasn't a drinker. Decided he was going to go into business for himself. So about 15 miles north of Burns, he started a wood camp where he's going to cut poles and lumber. He had about half a dozen men hired, including the cook, Matt Egan. Several days before Christmas, he informed Matt Egan that he was going to be replaced by a middle-aged, buxom widow. This didn't set very well with Matt, because he knew he'd been doing a good job, and this woman probably wasn't hired because of her cooking ability. He ended up in Burns. He ended up in the Caldwell Saloon, drinking some of that fighting whiskey. He let everybody be known that he'd been done wrong, and this Jack Miller was a dirty rat. About that time, Jack shows up in town. Matt walks out onto the street and accosts him. Lets him know that he thought that he'd been done wrong. And they ought to go in behind the livery stable and shoot this out like men. Jack says, "Now, Matt," he says, "you've been drinking. You need to sober up. Go home, take a nap, and you'll think better of this, and we'll still be friends." That seemed to cool it. So Jackie went on down the street to take care of his business. Matt, he went back into the Caldwell Saloon and had a couple more drinks of that fighting whiskey. He let everybody know that something has to be done about this, because he'd been done wrong. So he goes outside and stares over across the street where Jack's horse and saddle was tied up. Pretty soon, Jack comes out of the Welch Smelser Saloon, and Matt steps out onto the street and hollers at him, motions for him to come there. Jack, he shakes his head, puts his head down, turns and swiftly starts walking over towards Matt. About the time he's just about up to Matt, Matt told him, "Halt!" And he pulls this long-barreled Smith & Wesson 6-shooter out of his belt, pulls it up to take a shot at Jack, and Jack grabs the gun, pushes up just as the bullet goes off, and it goes off over his shoulder. So here he's holding Matt's gun, and Jack pulls this Colt Bulldog 6-shooter out of his shirt pocket and pulls it up to shoot at Matt, and Matt shoves it down the ground, and he shoots into the ground. So they're both standing here holding each other's pistols. They're both strong men, but Jack, he has the advantage because he's got the underhold. So he slowly pulls his pistol up and shoots Matt 1, 2, 3, 4 times in the midsection. Matt looks at Jack and says, "You got me, Jack," and he slithers into the ground and passes away. Well, Jack, he steps on Matt, pulls Matt's gun out of his hand, and grabs both pistols and walks down the street over in front of the saloon. He says, "If any of you SOSs and are friends of Matt's think I did wrong, step right out here and we'll settle it." Well, evidently he didn't have any friends, or they didn't have enough fighting whiskey. So Jackie kind of cooled off, turns Matt's gun back in, takes his gun, and goes back to his wood camp. Several days after Christmas, he shows back into town, fill out this order. Well, same time, the sheriff from Baker shows up. He goes into McGowan's Mercantile, and he says, "Do you know who this Jack Miller is?" He says, "Oh, yeah." He says, "I got a work order for him here, and fill his wagon out." He says, "Well," he says, "I think that wagon might be mine, because my wagon and team was accosted from a bailiff in Baker, and I have a warrant for him." He said, "Well, he's in town." Well, Jack, he hears about the sheriff being there, so he waits till dark. He jumps in the wagon and whips the horses down Main Street, making a lot of noise, and the sheriff notices him, and he gets the posse together and takes after him. They find the wagon wrecked in a gully. So he takes the wagon and team back to Baker. Nothing's heard of Jack Miller for a while. Well, Ed Hanley, the brother of Bill Hanley, gets a hold of McGowan. He says, you know, Jack Miller and I, we took a bunch of horses from Harnett County up to the Klondike when the gold rush time, and we made some pretty good money. You know that Jack Dawson is really Jack Miller. We made the Dawson Trail. So McGowan, he sends a work bill up to Jack Dawson for Jack Miller. Jack Dawson pays the bill. So there's that story, and here's to you.